Donald Trump is apparently Batman. Yes, that's what he told a 9-year-old boy from Iowa who rode on his helicopter this weekend at the Iowa State Fair. Watch the YouTube video.
Yes.
Mr. Trump.
Yes.
Are you Batman?
I am Batman.
That's pretty cute, actually. My colleague John Berman asked one of Trump's top advisors in Iowa about that claim today.
Donald Trump told a child this weekend that he is Batman. Chuck Lauder, can you confirm to us that Donald Trump is Batman?
Well, I don't think I can confirm it, but it certainly connects a few dots. I'll just say that.
Well, Trump gave free rides on his helicopter to dozens of kids at the Iowa State Fair. Certainly looked like he was having fun doing all of that.
We are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
And we give it back to you, the people.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital
Are corrupt.
has reaped the rewards of government,
The rich.
while the people have borne the cost.
The oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity.
The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country.
And do you accept the resignation of all of these liars, of all the corrupt?
That all changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you.
None shall interfere. Do as you please.
January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The United States of America.
It will endure.
So manageable numbers. Bottom line, we don't have to worry about this one, right?
Well, obviously you need to take it seriously and do the kinds of things that the CDC and the Department of Homeland Security are doing. But this is not a major threat for the people in the United States, and this is not something that the citizens of the United States right now should be worried about.
Hi, everybody. So we have this bizarre virus in the United States. It's called the Wuhan coronavirus. Started in China. Many victims there. What does it mean? How bad is this? Let's bring in Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is the director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. Welcome, sir. Can you hear me?
I can. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much. Wuhan coronavirus. What does it do? What are the symptoms?
Well, it's a virus that causes a respiratory syndrome, namely difficulty breathing, pneumonia, cough, and a fever. Very similar in many respects to other coronaviruses that have done what this virus did, which is namely jump species from an animal reservoir into humans and then spread from human to human. Remember, in 2002, we had the SARS virus, which was the severe acute respiratory syndrome. That also was a coronavirus. And the same sort of signs and symptoms, which is fundamentally pneumonia, a pulmonary problem, difficulty breathing, cough, and fever.
Well, it sounds awful. There's one reported case of it in Washington State. How did it get here?
Well, that was an individual who had visited China and actually visited the city that is the epicenter of this outbreak. And the city is Wuhan, as you mentioned. The person who is the first case now to be a travel-related case in the United States is someone who visited Wuhan, China, and then came back to Washington State. He was asymptomatic when he got here, but after a short period of time, he developed symptoms which alerted people to appreciate that he would be suspect of having this syndrome since he came from that region of China.
We now know that the first case manifested no later than December 1, even though China didn't reveal it to the WHO until a month later on December 31st, when they continued to hide it from their own citizens. And they continued to say that it had been contained inside Wuhan. Today, it is in every single province in China. They also claimed for almost 2 months until earlier this week that it had originated in a seafood market in Wuhan, that locals had contracted it from animals in, say, bat soup or snake tartare. That is not the case. The Lancet published a study last weekend demonstrating that of the original 40 cases, 14 of them had no contact with the seafood market, including patient 0. As one epidemiologist said, that virus went into the seafood market before it came out of the seafood market. We still don't know where it originated. Could have been another seafood market. Could have been a farm. Could have been a food processing company. I would note that Wuhan also has China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that works with the world's most deadly pathogens, to include, yes, coronavirus. Now, look at China's own actions. They have quarantined 60 million people, 60 million, more than the entire population of our West Coast. They've shut down schools indefinitely. Classes canceled nationwide indefinitely. Hong Kong, a part of China, has basically shut down all travel from the mainland. That's why it is essential that we immediately stop all travel on commercial aircraft between China and the United States. Making exceptions, of course, for American citizens to come back, as we just brought back yesterday, allowing essential trade to flow as long as crews on ships and aircraft are not allowed to go into the general population in America, and making exceptions, of course, for medical personnel to go into China to try to get a handle on this. It is essential that we take those steps, and essential that we get to the bottom of China's deceit and
The data also appear to show a decline in new cases. This trend must be interpreted very cautiously. Trends can change as new populations are affected. It's too early to tell if this reported decline will continue. Every scenario is still on the table. It also appears that COVID-19 is not as deadly as other coronaviruses, including SARS and MERS. More than 80% of patients have mild disease and will recover. It also appears that COVID-19 is not as deadly as other coronaviruses, including SARS and MERS. In about 14% of cases, the virus causes severe disease, including pneumonia and shortness of breath. And about 5% of patients have critical disease, including respiratory failure, septic shock, and multi-organ failure. In 2% of reported cases, the virus is fatal, and the risk of death increases the older you are.
We turn now to the accusations that China covered up the extent of the virus outbreak early this year. The Trump administration has also linked the virus to a lab in Wuhan. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci is addressing the issue. ABC's Alex Brachet has more.
This morning, Dr. Anthony Fauci is shooting down theories that the coronavirus was man-made. He tells National Geographic everything about the stepwise evolution over time strongly indicates that this virus evolved in nature and then jumped species. Fauci added he does not believe another theory that the virus occurred naturally but was accidentally released into the public from a lab in China. Telling Nat Geo that means it was in the wild to begin with. That's why I don't get what they're talking about. It comes after both President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo linked the virus to a lab in Wuhan without providing evidence.
Have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have.
There's enormous evidence that that's where this began. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
The U.S. is also accusing China of covering up just how devastating the virus was when it first hit. A U.S. Homeland Security report concludes, quote, the Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 from the international community in early January, while it stockpiled medical supplies. And now, in a new interview with the New York Post, President Trump claims more Americans are agreeing with him, with a desire for the U.S. to be less dependent on Chinese manufacturing, saying, the one thing that this pandemic has taught us is that I was right. Now those people are really agreeing with me, and that includes medicine and other things. The Chinese government is preparing for a serious backlash because of this pandemic. Reuters says Beijing's Ministry of State Security has already warned that anti-China sentiment around the world is at its highest level since the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989.
Originated in that Wuhan lab.
Martha, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence community continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Do you believe it was man-made or genetically modified?
But the best experts so far seem to think it was man-made. I have no reason to disbelieve that at this point.
Your Office of the DNI says the consensus, the scientific consensus, was not man-made or genetically modified.
That's right. I agree with that. Yeah, I've seen their analysis. I've seen the summary that you saw that was released publicly. I have no reason to doubt that that is accurate at this point.
Okay, so just to be clear, you do not think it was man-made or genetically modified?
I've seen what the intelligence committee has said. I have no reason to believe that they've got it wrong. You have to put this in context. Here's what's important, Martha. Here's what's important. The Chinese Communist Party had the opportunity to prevent all of the calamity that has befallen the world. And here we find ourselves today. You and I were talking about we haven't seen each other physically for a long time. That's true of people all across the world. This is an enormous crisis created by the fact the Chinese Communist Party reverted to form, reverted to the kinds of disinformation, the kinds of concealment that authoritarian regimes do. Had those scientists been operating in America, they would have put this out. There would have been an exchange of ideas, and we would have quickly identified the kinds of things that needed to be done in response. Instead, China behaved like authoritarian regimes do, attempted to conceal and hide and confuse. It employed the World Health Organization as a tool to do the same. It's the kind of things that have now presented this enormous crisis, an enormous loss of life, and tremendous economic cost all across the globe. The Australians agree with that. You hear the Europeans beginning to say the same thing. I think the whole world is united, understanding that China brought this virus to the world.
And just very quickly, if we can, Mr. Secretary, running out of time, do you think they intentionally released that virus, or it was an accident in the lab?
I don't have anything to say about that. I think there's a lot to know, but I can say this. We've done our best to try and answer all of those questions. We tried to get a team in there. The World Health Organization tried to get a team in there, and they have failed. No one's been allowed to go to this lab or any of the other laboratories. There are many labs inside of China, Martha. This risk remains. This is an ongoing challenge. We still need to get in there. We still don't have the virus samples we need. This is an ongoing threat, an ongoing pandemic, and the Chinese Communist Party continues to block access to the Western world, the world's best scientists, to figure out exactly what happened. So I can't answer your question about that because the Chinese Communist Party has refused to cooperate with World Health experts.
You said a moment ago you will soon have information on where this virus originated. The Director of National Intelligence today put out a statement saying that they believe it was naturally occurring, it was not man-made. But
who is that? Who is that that said that?
The Office of the Director of National
but
Intelligence.
Who in particular? Who was the man that made that statement?
It was a statement that the ODNI...
Oh, you would know that, National Intelligence. So we'll see.
That would be your Director of National Intelligence.
No, I think it's... I mean, you'd have to tell me who specifically, who made the statement.
The statement was just put out under the office of the
Okay,
ODNI.
we'll see. I mean, I have to see the statement. I just haven't seen it.
But the question I had was, have you seen anything at this point?
Because we're looking at that, John, separately from...
But
we're looking at exactly where it came from, who it came from, how it happened, separately and also scientifically. So we're going to be able to find out.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Are you suggesting that maybe you have some evidence that this was not a naturally occurring virus?
We're going to see what it is. You're talking about the virus and where it came from? Yeah. No, we're going to see where it is. We're going to see where it comes from. And, you know, look, you know every theory. You had the theory from the lab, you had the theory from many different, the bats, you know, the type of bat, and the bat is 40 miles away, so it couldn't have been here, and it couldn't have been there. And, there's a lot of theories, but yeah, we have people looking at it very, very strongly.
And what gives
scientific people, intelligence people, and others.
And what gives
we're going to put it all together, and I think we're going to have a very good answer eventually.
And what gives you?
And China might even tell us. China may tell us.
And what gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Mr. President?
Jeff, go ahead. Group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that. Group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available too. Group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available too. Group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the broadcast. I have spent dozens and dozens of hours editing. This guy on the back here, that's Dr. Fauci. And there's something that the whole world is waiting to hear, and that's Donald Trump's words. Dr. Fauci, you're fired.
Thank you, Mr. President. U.S. intelligence is saying this week that the coronavirus likely came from a level 4 lab in Wuhan. There's also another report that the NIH, under the Obama administration in 2015, gave that lab $3.7 million in a grant. Why would the U.S. give a grant like that to China?
The Obama administration gave them a grant of $3.7 million. I've been hearing about that. And we've instructed that if any grants are going to that area, we will end that grant very quickly.
So what is recently being discovered is that in 2015, $3.7 million was given to the lab in Wuhan. The next clip's going to show you that in 2014, they had decided they put a moratorium on any funds going to labs to create viruses. It was decided, why would we do that? But in 2015, Dr. Fauci decided they would send $3.7 million to fund that. Is it any wonder that Donald Trump has retweeted tweets that say, fire Fauci?
Is this the same topic we're talking about here? This news is just breaking?
Yes, this is exactly right. So it goes back to 2014. The U.S. government decided, based upon certain virologists at that time, saying that, look, there's no justification for this kind of research. There's a potential for it to cause harm, cause a pandemic. So there's no justification for us to do this type of research. So the government passed a moratorium in 2014. Fauci approved approved budgets to be monies to be sectioned for this type of research. So basically, and I'm getting really, every time I think about this, it gets me really flustered because I'm so angry that he basically broke the law. He more than broke the law. He created this entire cascade that we're seeing with the world shutdown was created by this initial aspect back in 2015. He broke the law. He went against government moratoriums. He took taxpayer money and he funded research that has now led to the COVID-19. In 2017, he was documented at Georgetown University saying that there will be a pandemic that this presidency will face, that this term will face. How did he know that in 2017 that something was going to happen in 2018, 19, or 2020? You can't predict the market from 3 days from today, what's going to happen. How did he know that there was going to be a pandemic? He stated the president of this president will face a pandemic. The exact quotes, I don't want to say the exact words. You guys have the video footage.
There is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that. But also there will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak.
When somebody starts making these type of statements, and then they were involved with the breaking of the law to fund the research that American taxpayers paid for, that then goes to Wuhan and now trying to create this diversion and say that it was China.
So at best, Americans are funding people who are lying to us, and at worst, we're funding people who we knew had problems handling pathogens, who then birthed a monster virus onto the world.
Dr. Fauci, could you address these suggestions or concerns that this virus was somehow man-made, possibly came out of a laboratory in China? You studied this virus. What are the prospects of that?
Yeah. There was a study recently that we can make available to you where a group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available too.
Okay, I can't prove it right now, but if all of this is as it seems, Dr. Fauci has got to be very stressed out. And if he is not stressed out, then he's even more sociopathic than we knew. He's in trouble. And I think it's time to fire Fauci.
Is Fauci directly responsible for this pandemic because he maneuvered the money, he maneuvered around the moratorium, kept this chimeric research going in China? Is he directly responsible for not just the pandemic, but also the response that's killed the economy, put, 17 to 22 million people out of work? Is Fauci directly responsible?
I'm going to say this. I think that I've seen some petitions going around. I know Dr. Shiva said that Fauci should be fired. I think that's the nicest thing that could be done to Fauci. I think he should. He's a criminal. He's broken the law. He's gone against the government. I mean, to me, that seems like it's a traitorous thing to do when the government has passed a regulation and he's at one of the highest levels in the NIH. He's got a directorship at the NIH, and then he breaks the law, he breaks the moratorium, and then funds research against something that could potentially cause harm throughout the entire world, and he's in collusion with the foreign government.
We also talked about the lab in China where I guess 3.7 million was given some time ago, and we're looking at that very closely. Chief of Staff has that pretty much under control, but it's money that, too bad it got spent there.
Totally consistent.
So the lab in Wuhan was unsafe. That was obvious to Americans visiting there 2 years ago. And because of the practices there, the Chinese may have unleashed a global pandemic on the rest of us. Here's something remarkable and upsetting. The work in that lab, including its research into disease-carrying bats, was funded in part by U.S. taxpayers through the National Institutes of Health. Hard to believe that's true, but it is. Congressman Matt Gaetz represents Florida. He joins us tonight to follow up on this story. Congressman, that's one of those stories that if you had said that out loud a week ago, I think even I might have dismissed you as insane, but it's true. How did this happen?
Yeah, I'm against funding Chinese research in our country, but I'm sure against funding it in China. The NIH gives this $3.7 million grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They then advertise that they need coronavirus researchers. Following that, coronavirus erupts in Wuhan. And then what's really troubling to me is that either conspicuously or miraculously, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is able to sequence the virus on January 2nd, but China doesn't admit to the virus existing to January 9th, and then the Wuhan Institute of Virology doesn't release this important scientific information to the world until January 12th. So at best, Americans are funding people who are lying to us, and at worst, we're funding people who we knew had problems handling pathogens, who then birthed a monster virus onto the world.
By the way, China is about to eclipse us in terms of the size of its economy, if it hasn't already, and it seems like it already may have. Either way, why would we be sending any money to China for any purpose?
There is a far too cozy relationship between U.S. research and Chinese research because there are some research institutions in our country who realize the short-term benefit of Chinese cash. But that doesn't excuse our government. And what should really trouble viewers is that this is an active grant. This isn't something of yesteryear. And so I've called on Secretary Azar to immediately halt this grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They have not been honest, and at worst, they've been negligent to the point of many deaths throughout the world.
Available to a group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available too.
Some idea of what the news that is coming about the testimony from Fauci. The president said that, frankly, the situation. OK, Fauci will testify in the Senate. The Democrats should be ashamed, he said. He referenced the House as a bunch of Trump haters. So it sounds like that is where we are learning about this testimony of Dr. Fauci in the Senate. As we await to hear from the president in his own words, this would certainly be a big moment in the middle of this pandemic to hear from the lead infectious disease expert that has been advising the president, Chris.
Right, and this is a big moment for the president, too. He's making he's going out to a swing state for one of these kind of visits that Pence tried out last week. He's going to go. Will he wear a mask? Who's wearing a mask? How's it going? And again, Arizona is a swing state and a place where are watching this closely. And there's been a lot of tension between the people who are angry about the lockdown and people who are concerned about this illness. And the president's flying out. He's flying right into the middle of that. And this is all part of an administration that's trying to pivot forward into reopening and away from having to talk all the time about the sickness and its containment.
Yeah, and as far as the concerns about the people traveling with him, he also is talking and taking questions on that. Everyone traveling with him and around him has been tested. All right, we will hear from the president in a short time from now. Chris Darwalt, great to be with you this morning.
You heard him. Slow ahead. Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chum some of this shit. You're gonna need a bigger boat. Shut off that engine.
That's a 20-footer. 25. 3 tons on.
We now know that the first case manifested no later than December 1, even though China didn't reveal it to the WHO until a month later on December 31st, when they continued to hide it from their own citizens, and they continued to say that it had been contained inside Wuhan. Today, it is in every single province in China. They also claimed for almost 2 months, until earlier this week, that it had originated in a seafood market in Wuhan, that locals had contracted it from animals in, say, bat soup or snake tartare. That is not the case. The Lancet published a study last weekend demonstrating that of the original 40 cases, 14 of them had no contact with the seafood market, including patient 0. As one epidemiologist said, that virus went into the seafood market before it came out of the seafood market. We still don't know where it originated. Could have been another seafood market. Could have been a farm. Could have been a food processing company. I would note that Wuhan also has China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that works with the world's most deadly pathogens, to include, yes, coronavirus. Now, look at China's own actions. They have quarantined 60 million people, 60 million, more than the entire population of our West Coast. They've shut down schools indefinitely. Classes canceled nationwide indefinitely. Hong Kong, a part of China, has basically shut down all travel from the mainland. That's why it is essential that we immediately stop all travel on commercial aircraft between China and the United States. Making exceptions, of course, for American citizens to come back, as we just brought back yesterday, allowing essential trade to flow as long as crews on ships and aircraft are not allowed to go into the general population in America, and making exceptions, of course, for medical personnel to go into China to try to get a handle on this. It is essential that we take those steps, and essential that we get to the bottom of China's deceit and incompetence on this measure. And gentlemen, I raise this with you because you're responsible in your combatant commands for some countries that have the most fragile public institutions, to include the most fragile public health institutions in the world. So I ask, even though as of this morning there are not yet confirmed cases of coronavirus in your combatant commands, though I suspect there will be soon, what is your assessment about the ability of the governments in your combatant commands to handle a potential global pandemic like this, General Townsend?
Thanks, Senator. So there are not, that I'm aware of, any confirmed cases, as you mentioned, but there are some suspected cases. The first report of suspected case I've heard of is in Djibouti, which you would imagine with the significant Chinese presence there. So the capacity of African nations to deal with this problem varies widely. For example, in Eastern Africa, Central East Africa, they've been dealing with Ebola and they've been dealing with Ebola largely on their own and doing a pretty good job of it. So I think capacity there, but anywhere else in Africa is probably not to that degree.
Admiral Fowler.
The Venezuela crisis has already strained the social services of many of the nations. As you're aware, Senator, we had to deploy the hospital ship Comfort twice in 1 year to last deployment 12 different nations. And in one 5-day span, it can do the equivalent of a whole month for a region of some of the major countries. So I would be extremely concerned. Like General Townsend, the capacities vary widely, but in many cases they're strained and to the limit. I'd be very concerned if we saw this spread.
Thank you. As a defensive measure, I just say again, it is essential that we shut down all commercial air travel immediately between the United States and China. As an offensive measure, because that probably won't stop it entirely, and because if it becomes a global pandemic, we have to deal with countries with very limited capabilities here. We need a Manhattan Project level effort to work with our best research scientists and laboratories in this country to develop a vaccine as quickly.
A good butler never forgets. Oh, the crab meat canapes. I must pop them in the oven right away.
Good idea, this rehearsal. The ladies, such worthy causes. I personally favor Miss Natural Resources. I'd like to make her my own personal charity. All are worthy. You can say that again.
And that is Bruce Wayne's grandfather, Mrs. Cooper?
His great-grandfather.
I understand he was tapped for Skull and Bones.
Tapped for it? Sir, he founded Skull and Bones.
Canopy, miss?
Oh, no, thank you. I have to watch my figure.
I quite understand.
How do we decide where we have dinner?
By vote, as usual, in the democratic way. Canopy, sir?
Don't mind if I do. Hey, what's this? A fish hook.
I'm terribly sorry, sir. It must have fallen out of my morning coat.
Your morning coat?
Yes, sir. The one I wore this morning when I was preparing the canapes.
Excuse me, old boy.
Sir, please do have another. I can assure you the best.
Fallen from his morning coat, the one he wore. Yes, this morning when the penguin grabbed him. A clue, Dick. Quickly, back to the Batcave.
They also claimed for almost 2 months, until earlier this week, that it had originated in a seafood market in Wuhan. That locals had contracted it from animals in, say, bat soup or snake tartare.
A fisher! Clearly that must mean...
The waterfront.
Holy fog, of course.
All are worthy.
You can say that again.
And that is Bruce Wayne's grandfather, Mrs. Cooper?
His great-grandfather.
I understand he was tapped for Skull and Bones.
Tapped for it? Sir, he founded Skull and Bones.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society. It's so secret we can't talk about it. What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go on. I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the rest. Number 322.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret. Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code? I wish there were something secret I could manifest. 322, a secret number? There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret.
We are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
And we give it back to you, the people.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital
are corrupt,
has reaped the rewards of government,
the rich,
while the people have borne the cost.
The oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity.
The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country.
And do you accept the resignation of all of these liars, of all the corrupt?
That all changes, starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you.
None shall interfere. Do as you please.
January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The United States of America.
It will endure.